Hada, this is Christy Salzman and Stephanie Leggett. We are the Relationship and Government team. The title of our study was The Battle for Knowledge and Trust, the United States Coast Guard versus the American Red Cross. The purpose of our study was to investigate whether knowledge and trust affected the relationship of an organization and its intended audiences. Like I said before, we chose the United States Coast Guard and the American Red Cross. And the reasons we chose them, as many of you know, both Christy and myself have a previous relationship with the United States Coast Guard as we've both served. And Christy and Stephanie both have a relationship with we also chose these services because they are both humanitarian services who were recently spotlighted in the news for their response efforts with the Haitian earthquake. The theory that we used was relationship theory, which was based on the interpretation of Mary Ferguson from 1984. She said that this was used to identify and assess the relationship of an organization has with its publics and to include the extent of the shared understanding. Our independent variable was knowledge and our dependent variable was trust.
To complete this research, we decided that we would do an online survey. And the survey was sent out via SurveyMonkey. What happened was we used a convenient sample of UGA students, both undergraduate and graduate students. An invitation email was sent out to 2,039 individuals, inviting them to be a part. They could decline if they wished. And at that point, if they accepted, clicked the yes button, they would go on to the survey. The survey itself was 3 different sections. It was knowledge, and then I'll go into more about that. It was knowledge, and then it was relationship and familiarity, followed by some demographic questions. To create our survey, we actually used 2 previously validated scales. We used Hendrick's relationship scale, as well as Bearden and Oliver's familiarity scale. As far as for the knowledge section, we had 5 missions for the U.S. Coast Guard and 5 missions for the American Red Cross, interspersed, so it wasn't very obvious which one was which. And we asked the respondents to pick which missions were for each organization. As they went through the survey, they were asked on a 5-point Likert scale, 22 other questions that dealt with the familiarity and relationship. And one of the constructs within the relationship scale was trust. And I'll get into our research questions before I have some other stats. Our first research question was, does the level of knowledge of an organization affect the level of trust in that organization? And number 2, does the public trust a military entity more than a nonprofit organization? Now back to the scales themselves and the survey itself. After that invitation email was sent out, we sent out 3 more waves to remind the students to please help us and to please finish their survey if they started it and did not finish. We received 241 responses, and of that 241, 100 of them were female and 50 were male. You'll note there were several that chose not to answer several demographic questions, such as their gender, for whatever reason. We did have, the largest percentage was graduate students, so thank you very much for helping us, graduate students, and the largest percentage of ethnicity based on the ones that we gave them was Caucasian or white for 121 people, and 42 had volunteered with the American Red Cross. Now moving on to our results section, once we got our data, we did several different tests, and after running some of those tests, we found that we couldn't break trust out of the relationship scale. So we had to go back and re-examine things. Because of not being able to break trust out, we couldn't clearly answer either of our research question, as trust was a crux of both of them. But we did find some very interesting as well as significant data. One interesting point was there was a strong correlation between familiarity of an organization and relationship with that organization. For instance, if you were very familiar with the United States Coast Guard, you were going to have a higher relationship with the United States Coast Guard. Also, we found that if you were familiar with one organization, you would be familiar with the other organization. One of the significant findings was that the level of knowledge of the U.S. Coast Guard was much higher than the level of knowledge of the American Red Cross. Also, the level of knowledge of males of the U.S. Coast Guard was higher than females. And now I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Some implications of our research study was that There were higher levels of confidence for a nonprofit organization such as the American Red Cross than there were for the U.S. Coast Guard. Also, there were higher levels of familiarity, as Christy mentioned, with the American Red Cross than there was with the U.S. Coast Guard. A possible reason for this could be because of the general location and area that University of Georgia is in. We're located not very close to a coastal community, whereas the U.S. Coast Guard generates a majority of its population from those coastal communities. Due to time and financial constraints, our best approach was to use an online survey via SurveyMonkey. However, this decreased our sample size dramatically, and it limited it just to University of Georgia students here between the ages of 18 and 27 years. We also had a very low response rate. It was only 11.8%, and this could be because of two main reasons. First, the spam filter. It could have been sent to each of the respondents' spam mail and filtered out where they didn't receive it, didn't respond, etc. Or it could be because of the extensive length. It was 10 pages long. That's kind of long for someone to be taking an online survey. Therefore, next time we would probably want to shorten it, ask fewer questions, group them together so it's less intimidating for each student to respond. One final point is that our future research might include an online experiment involving interviews, and these interviews could be conducted to see how people actually form these relationships with each organization, and to see what their exposure levels are with the organizations, and see how that helps form the relationship as well.
So to summarize our study, we found that higher levels of familiarity exist through prior experience such as volunteering. And although we are unable to show that knowledge and trust were dependent upon each other, as we previously hoped we could find, we did find that having knowledge with an organization does not necessarily mean that you will trust or have a stronger relationship with said organization. So on behalf of the group, we'd like to thank you for taking time out of your day and open up to questions.